With 7 seasons overflowing with wonderful adventures and unexpected twists and turns, eventually dropping on the likes of Cartoon Network, Netflix, and Disney Plus over the years, it was only natural for a few of the less obvious but no less brilliant Clone Wars details to slip under the radar, even after multiple rewatches of the fantastic animated war drama. But those days of overlooking everything from intriguing eyes to subtle connections to Star Wars icons and other legendary franchises in this magnificent series will be over once you reach the end of this mighty list. Because I am Gareth, this is What Culture Star Wars, and here are 20 things you somehow missed in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Number 20. Count Dooku's brief Sith eyes. Unlike the majority of the other Sith Lords found blasting Jedi with lightning and trying to slice them in two with their bleeding red lightsaber, Count Dooku's eyes don't actually ever turn yellow during his appearances in Episode 2 Attack of the Clones or Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. For those unaware, the reason a Sith's eyes change color to that sinister yellowy and red is down to the fact that eyes are the window to the soul in Star Wars, with that eye change being a result of a person's uncontrollable rage burning within them, with Dooku being a largely composed individual and a person who largely just wanted to bring an end to the corruption he saw within the Galactic Senate throughout the films then, and seemingly not being entirely consumed by anger and hate like a Darth Maul, for example. It made sense that his eyes didn't go through that same change. In the movies, at least. There were actually a few moments there in the Clone Wars where they did, highlighting how Dooku wasn't always an entirely calm and collected dark side user. Dooku's fight with Anakin on Tatooine during the Clone Wars movie in 2008, and the scene showing him training Maul's brother Savage Opress in Season 3's Witches of the Mist episode, both contain a yellow-eyed Dooku during a few blink-and-you'll-miss-it moments. And while on the subject of eyes, number 19, Anakin's eyes in Vader's helmet. Jumping all the way to the final ever scene of Star Wars: The Clone Wars now, and to the visual of a fallen Anakin Skywalker discovering his old Padawan Ahsoka Tano's lightsaber, a few years on from the conclusion of the titular battles. It's a properly moving beat to bring the incredibly impactful series to its end, with Darth Vader also taking in the Tribunal Star Destroyer which crashed on this snowy moon as Order 66 started to alter the galaxy, all whilst wondering whether his Padawan was still among those who survived the Purge. But look closely at the masked icon's face as he raises his head to look at something hovering above him in the sky, which we'll get to, don't worry. And after a quick pause of the action, you'll actually be able to spot a quite interesting detail you likely missed during a first watch. Instead of burning yellow and red with anger as they often were during this period in his life, here the Sith Lord's eyes behind the red lenses appear more like the ones seen on a pre-fall Anakin Skywalker. This was likely because the one-time Jedi Knight was thinking about an Ahsoka he once cared deeply about in this moment, with that thought and this visual highlighting how the good man buried deep within still wasn't entirely lost here. And while we're talking about Sith Lords, I want to know right now, who is your favorite Sith of all time? Is it Vader? Is it Maul? Is it Dooku? You let me know who is in the comment section below. Number 18, an important bird is present throughout. As promised, that final scene in Season 7's Victory and Death episode also contained another detail some may not have fully understood the significance of during a first watch. When Vader does look up to the sky after hearing a squawk from above, the former Anakin Skywalker sees a bird circling him. This is actually Morai, a bird who would show up in everything from Rebels to The Mandalorian to Ahsoka over the years. This convor was said to be spiritually connected to the Daughter, one of the Mortis gods that Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka interact with during the Clone Wars Mortis arc. And following on from the Daughter's eventual death in those episodes, sacrificing herself to bring Tano back to life, Morai would begin showing up alongside Ahsoka. Far from being a random occurrence then, it seems this bird, which some even think is the manifestation of the Daughter, someone who evidently represented the light side in a different form, was perhaps trying to guide Anakin back towards the light in this moment. Number 17, a Big Lebowski nod. Dave Filoni, George Lucas, and the rest of the gang clearly had a ball sneaking in a number of cheeky references to some of pop culture's biggest movies throughout this 7-season Clone Wars journey. And one of the many legendary films you possibly didn't realize were hinted at during the show came in the form of the brilliant Coen Brothers comedy crime picture The Big Lebowski. These tributes occur in season 3 of the show. Firstly, you have a quite familiar statement uttered by Maverick Jedi Master Quinlan Vos, with that legend replying to Obi-Wan's comments on timekeeping in the Hunt for Zero episode by calmly stating, "Well, that's your opinion, man. The dude would be proud." Then you have the Trandoshan bounty hunter who first pops up in Padawan Lost, an alien who boasts not just the same Soshek name used by John Goodman's Walter Soshek, but also some tinted eyewear and shorts inspired by the ones Goodman's character would typically wear to the bowling alley. These references really tied the room together, you know? Number 16, Cad Bane used a tried and tested Star Wars disguise tactic. Speaking of costume details that are easy to overlook in this sprawling animated spin-off, the coolest bounty hunter in the galaxy, Cad Bane, actually added his name to one of the most star-studded lists in Star Wars history during the Clone Wars. You see, as the presumed dead Duros sharpshooter looks to sneak off a Republic Star Destroyer in Season 2's Children of the Force episode, he does so whilst under the disguise of a clone trooper, and the plan ultimately works, even if he was very nearly stopped thanks to his distinctly green blood being discovered just before he could escape. This definitely wasn't the first time a Star Wars character had opted to pretend to be an enemy trooper to complete a mission though, with the likes of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, Ezra Bridger, and Kanan Jarrus all donning similar trooper disguises at various points in the timeline. It just wouldn't be a Star Wars project without someone going undercover to sneak past an enemy. Number 15, a number of Indiana Jones references. Returning to those salutes towards some of the greatest movies ever made, another project under the Lucasfilm banner received some love in a few different Clone Wars episodes too. The whip-cracking adventures of none other than Indiana Jones himself are alluded to time and time again in the show. Raiders of the Lost Ark's Staff of Ra has a similar head to the one seen on top of Senator Karras's in Season 1's The Gungan General episode. Then you have the titular Ark itself making something of a cameo appearance in the background, as Twi'leks cram valuables onto Emir Wat Tambor's ship in the Liberty of Ryloth episode in Season 1. Elsewhere, that bounty hunting badass again, Cad Bane, nearly threw on a fedora similar to Indy's during Season 4's Friends and Enemies episode as he looked through Pablo's pawn shop. And there was that time Mace Windu almost lost his lightsaber as a door was closing on him in Season 2's Children of the Force chapter, with that visual of the Jedi Master force grabbing his weapon just in the nick of time, mirroring the iconic Indy hat grab. But simply, there are a hell of a lot of Jones tributes in this galaxy far, far away. Number 14, a monument paying tribute to the very beginning. A very different kind of tribute shows up in the galaxy far, far away for the first time during the Clone Wars 5th season. When Ahsoka Tano attempts to flee some incoming clone troopers after being framed for a number of murders and the bombing of the Jedi Temple, the Padawan is seen sprinting across the top of a large monument on Coruscant. If you take a second to pause and examine this giant slab of rock though, you'll notice a ton of markings etched into it. Said Aurebesh inscriptions are actually the designations of each and every clone who fell during the first battle of the Clone Wars. And the rock they were marked onto was actually taken from the planet that fight went down on, Geonosis. The same monument would also show up later down the road in the Bad Batch Season 2 episode The Solitary Clone, serving as a reminder of the price these clones had to pay when fighting the Republic's battles for them. Number 13, one passcode is somewhat familiar. In what was little more than a way of throwing out a wink at the project which started it all, Season 7's penultimate and incredibly devastating episode Shattered contained a quite cool Easter egg most weren't quick to catch first time around. After Ahsoka Tano is forced to fight off a collection of clone troopers she'd once called friends and allies, the former Jedi begins to search through files on Clone Trooper 5s via R7-A7 and the Republic's central computer, after Rex had just told her to find him. However, right when Tano tried to access a grievance report logged by Rex following Five's discovery about the inhibitor chips within each and every clone, one which showed him talking about them possibly having a purpose they didn't fully understand at the time, the commander was denied access. To get around this obstacle, Tano simply used her one-time master Anakin Skywalker's passcode. This wasn't just a thrown-together collection of numbers though. That code of 8108 was actually the date the Clone Wars movie which kicked off the series premiered, with that feature first arriving on August 10, 2008. A long time ago indeed. Number 12, a nod to the Son of Dathomir comic. One of the biggest revelations to fall out of this animated collection of Star Wars tales was the fact that the Sith Lord known as Maul hadn't actually perished on Naboo during the events of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. This tortured Dathomirian soul would then spend seasons trying to both get his revenge on old foe Obi-Wan Kenobi and his one-time master Darth Sidious, forming formidable alliances with his brother Savage Opress and the Death Watch along the way. But Maul's post-Episode 1 story would also be told elsewhere, with a comic book by the name of Son of Dathomir being adapted from the scripts that weren't ultimately used for the Clone Wars series. In this tale, Maul eventually finds himself being imprisoned by his former master, and his new apprentice Count Dooku following the former's duel with Maul and his brother on Mandalore in the show. In the end though, Rook Kast and Gar Saxon managed to free their leader in the comic, and this was actually briefly mentioned during Maul's speech to his Mandalorian warriors in Season 7's The Phantom Apprentice episode. But without knowledge of that Son of Dathomir arc even being a thing, it's rather easy to overlook this vital part of the Sith Lord's story away from the series being referenced as he inspires his super commandos. Number 11, Dryden Voss and Caleb Doom's hologram appearances. Keeping with that specific scene involving Maul thanking his Mandalorian pals for saving him and letting them know that the galaxy was very much on the verge of being remade, the sequence kicks off with the Sith Lord giving out orders to the rest of his Shadow Collective via hologram. And among said members was the Pike Syndicate's Mark Krim, Black Sun Zaiton Moj, and none other than solo A Star Wars Stories Dryden Voss, the face of Crimson Dawn. Voss wasn't the only familiar face to make a blink and you'll miss it holo cameo in the Clone Wars though. During the Old Friends Not Forgotten episode that went down just before the aforementioned one in Season 7, a couple of Jedi are seen during the opening montage, along with Master Plo Koon and Aayla Secura being sent out to assist the clones fighting the Apparent's good fight. A hologram meeting within the Jedi Temple contains an appearance from Jedi Master Depa Billapa and her Padawan Caleb Doom. You know, the same Caleb Doom who would eventually go by the name of Kanan Jarrus after surviving Order 66, and train Ezra Bridger in the ways of the Force. Cheers for checking out this list today, folks, and if you're enjoying what you're watching, then hit that subscribe button down below. Number 10, the Mandalorian Guernica painting. As previously mentioned, Maul and his brother Savage Opress would eventually clash with Darth Sidious on Mandalore during Season 6's The Lawless chapter. And while the former apprentice of Palpatine made it out of that lightsaber showdown alive, the same could not be said for his hench sibling. It's in the wake of that fatal double-bladed stabbing, though, that a quite intriguing detail shows up in the background as Maul goes to check on his fallen apprentice. With much of the attention being on a devastated Maul and dying Opress here, many didn't catch the massive mural behind them depicting a battle between Mandalorians and the Jedi. There's also another one of these murals visible in Pre Vizsla's meeting room earlier in the show's run, with Dave Filoni later noting how these Cubist paintings were actually based on Picasso's Guernica anti-war creation. Both of the pieces look absolutely stunning, it must be said, and you can only imagine how much work went into these incredibly detailed paintings that were only really visible for a few fascinating Clone Wars moments. All that work, eh? Lovely. Number 9, the Lucas Papanoida family return. You're likely well aware at this point of George Lucas's brilliantly silly cameo appearance in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, as Baron Notlewiski Papanoida. But that wasn't the last we'd see of this Pantoran figure, of course, with the Clone Wars bringing the character back for the Sphere of Influence episode in Season 3. What you may not have realized when first watching that particular episode involving Papanoida's daughters being kidnapped, though, is the fact that said offspring were actually based on Lucas's own real-life kids. On top of Chi Ikwe and Chi Amanwe being based on Katie, who was also the writer of the episode, and Amanda Lucas, Ion Papanoida was also inspired by Lucas's son, Jet. These animated cameos aren't the first time the rest of the Lucas clan have shown up in the galaxy far, far away either, with all three making appearance in the prequel trilogy too. Number 8, Anakin's Dark Deeds returns. Hopping back to one of the most emotional sequences in Star Wars history. Season 7's Shattered episode depicts those early moments which followed Order 66 being given that weren't seen in the prequels. And one of the most underrated and likely overlooked elements of that heartbreaking scene, involving Ahsoka Tano having to turn her lightsabers on the clones, is the affecting theme which accompanies the violence. But why does this particular music hit a nerve, I hear you ask? Well, it's likely because this theme was actually the same one which could be heard as her master continued his fall to the dark side in Episode 3, with John Williams' Anakin's Dark Deeds playing out as the former Jedi slices through separatists on Mustafar, and Obi-Wan speaks with Padme about his fall. It's yet another powerful tune from the iconic composer, and one that neatly ties together the events of Episode 3 and the closing stages of the Clone Wars series. And once you remember exactly why this music rings a bell, it's impossible for your mind not to be cast back to some of the prequel's most heart-rending moments. Number 7, Captain Rex's Harrison Ford connection. When it comes to the iconic names who have brought various Star Wars characters to life over the decades, they don't come much bigger than the bloke who played Han Solo himself, Harrison Ford. So, on top of those already noted tips of the fedora to Indiana Jones throughout the series, the creators of the Clone Wars added in another easily missed salute towards that legend, with this one showing up on arguably the most memorable clone of the bunch. Captain Rex not only survived the titular battles, was able to get rid of the aforementioned inhibitor chip and eventually aid the rebellion, he also boasted a facial marking just like Ford has in real life. That unmistakable chin scar is just about visible whenever Rex isn't hiding it under his recognizable mask or glorious white beard in Rebels, and acts as a cool connection to another beloved Star Wars figure. Number 6, There's Always a Bigger Fish, Mobile. The same Children of the Force Season 2 episode which sees Mace Windu pull off an Indiana Jones-esque lightsaber save, and Cad Bane pretending to be a clone, also contained a pretty fun Episode 1 Easter egg, you know? With said bounty hunter collecting children showing Force potential for Darth Sidious in this Clone Wars chapter, his disturbing mission brings him to Jangwa City on Naboo, another Gungan city on the planet. A fight then ensues as Bane's plans to capture a young Gungan kid are foiled by Ahsoka Tano and Anakin Skywalker, and it's all that chaos which probably distracted the average viewer away from the mobile seen hanging above the Gungan child's crib. All three of the deadly monsters found chasing Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Jar Jar Binks in that first prequel are actually all present here, with the Oppie Sea Killer, Kolo Clawfish, and Sando Aqua Monster all helping this little one get off to sleep. How cool, and a bit traumatizing. Number 5, The Pirates of the Caribbean connection. The last of the many famous movie connections present in this captivating animated saga that will be mentioned here. Star Wars' numerous pirate personalities on show in the Clone Wars inevitably led to one rather comical tribute. Showing up in the box episode found in Season 4, a one-time pirate and now bounty hunter by the name of Kira Swan joins the other Killers for Hire, invited to compete in the titular competition. And if that name feels a bit familiar, it's likely because the two-time winner of the Obsidian Spear Bounty Hunter competition was given it as a reference to another much-loved franchise. Star Wars alum Keira Knightley, who played Sabe in Episode 1, also brought the eventual Pirate King Elizabeth Swann to life in the Pirates of the Caribbean series. So the show's creators seemingly combined the names of the actor and character to create this Weequay pirate tribute. Oh, and that aforementioned Obsidian Spear competition? That was also a nod to the Black Pearl ship too. So there's that. Number 4, a few special cameos. Unsurprisingly, many a Star Wars-loving performer in our own galaxy jumped at the chance to lend their voices to this animated Clone Wars spin-off. And joining the superb main cast members like Matt Lanter, James Arnold Taylor, Ashley Eckstein, and Dee Bradley Baker as Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka Tano, Captain Rex, and a ton of other figures in the series, were some properly eye-catching names. Some that you probably didn't even realize were behind the characters in question. First of all, Luke Skywalker himself and one of the greatest voiceover performers of all time, Mark Hamill, could be heard playing one of the most powerful Sith Lords ever, Darth Bane, seen in Season 6's Sacrifice episode. Elsewhere, there was also appearances from Ron Perlman as Gar Nacht in Downfall of a Droid and Duel of the Droids in Season 1, Simon Pegg as Dengar in the Bounty Season 4 chapter, George Takei as General Locke Durd in the Season 1 Defenders of Peace episode, and even Jon Favreau threw in his voice to play Pre Vizsla throughout the show. David Tennant would also first voice Huyang, eventually seen in the Ahsoka series during Season 5, and Ray Parks would return as Maul for his duel with Ahsoka in Season 7, using motion capture to bring his physical performance to the sequence. And last but not least, Liam Neeson made a return as Qui-Gon Jinn's spirit in the series 2. What an ensemble, baby! Number 3. The Fulcrum Codename. Throughout the Star Wars Rebels animated series set after the events of the Clone Wars but before the original trilogy, Ahsoka Tano can be seen using the codename Fulcrum when aiding the likes of Hera Syndulla and her Rebel pals. Said codename would then eventually be passed on to other Rebel spies and agents, with folks like defecting ISB agent Kallus taking on the title too. But if you were listening closely early on in Season 7's Old Friends Not Forgotten episode, the unexpected origins of that specific codename were revealed. It turns out that this was actually the name given to a subspace communications frequency used by Anakin Skywalker, with it being noted on the show that only a number of folks were aware of it, including freedom fighter Saw Gerrera, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Admiral Wolf Yularen, and you guessed it, Skywalker's Padawan Tano. Tano would use that frequency to get in touch with her former master as she requested help to capture Maul on Mandalore, with it then later being used as the inspiration for the name of the Fulcrum agents fighting against the Empire. Number 2. Maul's altered lightsaber. One episode on from Fulcrum's origins being revealed, that Force-wielding legend Ahsoka Tano would eventually collide with Maul in one of the greatest duels ever to explode into the galaxy far, far away. Up to this point, the Dathomirian Sith Lord had largely been using a standard single-bladed red lightsaber during his quest to gain as much power as possible and get revenge on his enemies. However, Season 7 brought with it the return of his iconic dual-bladed weapon. Well, sort of. While most folks were probably just giddily squealing at the visual of Maul igniting his badass lightsaber just like he did back in Episode 1, they likely missed the fact that this blade was actually somewhat different. After his original twin-bladed weapon was sliced in half by Kenobi on Naboo, it seems Maul didn't try to find a similar-looking hilt when forging his latest double lightsaber. Instead, he actually used a style that looked very similar to the one eventually used by Asajj Ventress for her yellow lightsaber in the Dark Disciple novel. Number 1. So much foreshadowing of Anakin's fall. Though there were definitely a few unexpected twists and turns thrown in there during the 7 seasons of Clone Wars animated drama, everyone knew where this one was heading. Along with the clones being forced to turn on their Jedi allies via Order 66, Anakin Skywalker's eventual fall to the dark side was inevitable, of course, and the show actually managed to foreshadow his incoming heel turn in quite a few subtle, disturbing, and impactful ways. Following on from violently cutting down some Tusken Raiders after they'd murdered his mom in Episode 2, the Clone Wars showed a pissed-off Anakin force-choking Poggle the Lesser in Season 2, losing his control when dealing with slavers in Season 4, horrifically beating the crap out of Clovis after watching him trying to make a move on Padme in Season 6, and even confessing to his Padawan that he understood wanting to walk away from the Order in Season 5. And while you probably caught many of those more obvious chunks of ominous foreshadowing, there were a few more easily missed details present too, like a sound similar to Vader's breathing being heard when Anakin was put on a ventilator in Season 1, and Skywalker's armor throughout the series looking very much like the chestplate he'd later wear as Darth. All of these moments and details, big and small, pointed to what we all knew was sadly on the horizon. This Skywalker taking a terrifying and catastrophic walk on the dark side.